Hello, welcome to the Infinity Unbound Get to Secure series that we're doing from the Infinity Group. In this session, we're going to talk about small to medium businesses, why they're a compelling proposition for cyber threats and cyber attacks. And I'm joined by a couple of guests. You want to say hello?
Yep. Hi everyone, Dave Morrow from Microsoft. I work in our security business in the UK.
Yeah, hi, and I'm Tom from Infinity Group. I'm the CTO.
And I'm Ian Stretton. I'm a pre-sales architect at Infinity Group. So as I touched on, we're going to talk a bit in this session about, we've got obviously other sessions that you can log into and watch as well, but in this session we're going to talk about why in particular small to medium businesses might be a good potential for an attack, maybe what some of those vulnerabilities might be and kind of where you could maybe look to shore up and secure up. And then maybe go through some valuable insight into some number of attacks that are happening at the moment, what kinds of attacks are happening at the moment as well. So I'll start with that opening question. So are small businesses really too small to attack?
No, absolutely not. No one's too small. And if anything, the smaller businesses are easier to pick off. They're not going to have the same kind of legal clout as a large enterprise that may want to pursue an attacker or a group that has attacked them. You know, so there's less risk of getting caught because there aren't systems or security professionals monitoring those entry points and activities going on in the network. So that leaves a kind of a low effort required for them to compromise those businesses, and the returns might not be so large, but you know, if you're going to invest 6 months to a year in attacking an enterprise for a relatively high risk of possibly no return, whereas you could turn over 100 small businesses in the same period of time and walk away with almost guaranteed return, then you're absolutely going to take that route. It's kind of lazy cybercrime, if you like. And there are still lots of substantial gains that they can make from small businesses. We're still dealing in tens to hundreds of thousands of pounds, even millions of pounds in terms of the money that is being shifted around. There's long lists of financial records that can be used for future extortion or find ways to attack other small businesses that may exist within their supply chain. Intellectual property to be stolen, small startups that are still providing very valuable IP and valuable services that can leave themselves open to being exploited.
I also think it's the economies of scale, right? If you look at the number of SMBs or small to medium-sized businesses in the UK, there's millions of them. If you look at the number of enterprises, there's maybe a couple of thousand, right? So the economies of scale are definitely at play there from an attacker's point of view. You know, they can cast that net quite wide and go after a whole bunch of customers, potential victims, rather than, as you say, targeted on that one kind of large enterprise where they've got a very binary chance of success. It's a yes or a no, whereas you target a couple of million businesses, you're probably going to be successful a handful of times, right? And don't forget their costs are very low. They don't have to spin up a whole bunch of expensive infrastructure to launch these attacks. Quite often they'll be using someone else's. So yeah, they'll cast that net very wide and target the millions of small to medium businesses that exist in the UK today. I think the other thing I'd say is the skills shortage in the industry. That exists across the board. You know, it's really hard for us at Microsoft or for a large enterprise, hard and expensive to recruit, hire and retain the cyber staff, cybersecurity staff. It's really difficult for a small to medium business, and like I say, expensive. And that means there may be less protected, to your point, than some of the larger enterprises out there. I think the knock-on effect of that skills shortage is, if you look at the way the cyber industry has been over a number of years, there's an issue or a problem, we go buy a point solution and we deploy that point solution, great. And then the next and the next and the next. And we're in this situation now where I think the average enterprise has 80 different security tools. So for a small to medium-sized business, maybe call it 20. with limited staff, how do you deploy, configure, manage and maintain 20 different products from 20 different vendors? It's incredibly difficult. So that skill shortage is just exaggerated in that small to medium business sector. And I think that's why we've seen a shift more towards a platform play, right, where you can deploy and consume more of a security platform and deploy more defenses because it's easier to manage and maintain. So yeah, I think the skill shortage is a huge challenge we have in the industry at the moment. And like I say, I think it's just exaggerated in that smaller to medium area.
Yeah, I think that the stat is that there's something like 4 million professionals missing. That's how many seats there are to be filled, and the extent to which that places businesses at risk is huge, because it's not just, as you say, people working within their organisation. It's people within the suppliers within the supply chain that are short of skills as well, and that does lead to, again, I think the stat is something like 2/3 of businesses are facing additional risk as a direct result of that skills shortage.
So I think over the last kind of couple of years, cyber security, cyber threats has kind of become more of a buzzword. It's definitely in the press a lot more, and you guys, I know because we've been talking obviously off camera about some statistics. Could you share that with the audience as well? Some of the scary numbers
Some of the scary numbers. Yeah. The one that springs to mind, I think the one we were talking about earlier, was the number of identity attacks we've seen increase over the year. So we saw it increase tenfold from 3 billion per month to 30 billion a month attacks against identities. So that's 4,000 a second, and that's just what we observe at Microsoft as part of our global intelligence network, and that's another huge number. That global intelligence network generates something like 78 trillion threat signals every day that we receive into our network, and just part of that is those identity attacks. And I think we said, certainly one of the reasons for that increase is automation, right? The attackers and the threat actor groups out there use automation so they can launch these attacks at scale. But also the number of identities has increased dramatically in that time as well, right? Things like cloud identities for multiple different cloud providers, as well as your on-premise identities, machine accounts, guest accounts, and so on. It's just meant that there's far more identities out there to go after than there was before. But certainly a worrying statistic, right? 30 billion a month is a huge amount.
A lot. Yeah. And just on that, I suppose I might be wrong in putting this out here, but in terms of some of the owners of businesses, would they be incorrect, and I think I know the answer already, is to assume that because these systems are cloud-based, or there is a move, if you like, to move some people's systems to cloud-based systems, that therefore that's the cause of this? It's opened up this world of people being able to attack, rather than actually, if we just keep it all in our own little network, nobody can ever attack us, we're fine, we've got the walls up, it's not a problem. I think that's
a difficult one to balance, isn't it?
Bad misconception, or
because you do increase the attack surface when you move to cloud, because you are becoming more visible, but you are at the same time getting access to systems that are far more resilient and loaded up with significantly more tools for providing security protection than you have within an on-premises environment. Small businesses simply don't have the financial mobility or capability to build that kind of security resilience in an on-premises environment. Whilst they may be a little bit less visible, somebody will find them eventually, and they'll have an even easier ride taking apart that on-premises solution than they would a large, heavily resilient cloud platform. So I think it is a misconception, but it's a misconception that does come with some realities at the same time, which is that those tools are there, and then you have to understand the kind of shared responsibility model of cloud computing, that some of those elements of security are your responsibility to control. The provider will make the platform resilient, but your identities, your data, you've got to protect those.
I completely agree with that. That shared responsibility model, if you're not familiar with it, I definitely recommend going and people like the NCSC, who we mentioned earlier, have some great guidance around that for sure. And I think the general guidance across the industry is to move as far as you can towards something like software as a service, where you're seeding as much of the security as you possibly can to that provider, right? So you don't have to worry about the physical security, the network security, the application, the operating system, and all those things. Whereas if you're a platform as a service or infrastructure as a service, then you do have to worry about some of those things. So move as close to you can as software as a service. And for many small to medium businesses, they're born in the cloud now. They don't really maintain much of an on-prem estate at all. So good, great. Leverage your underlying cloud providers' knowledge, expertise to do those things for you. But as you rightly say, the customer is always going to be responsible for the data and the configuration. So therefore the access, right? Who are you? You need to be sure that you're only letting in the people that you want to let in, that should be allowed in. That's always going to be your responsibility. And of course, we know you can never outsource your responsibility to secure the data. You decide what data goes in there, and you have to ensure that the security controls that are in place from the provider are adequate to meet the needs that you have as a business.
Yeah, and I think there is a misconception there that by outsourcing IT, you outsource the risk of the IT as well, which is just not the case. The business carries the risk, and there is. I think it's fair to say that even when you have a contract with an IT service provider, you do feel like there's almost an unwritten duty of care that comes with that contract, and the IT service providers should be providing you with that duty of care, but it can only ever go so far, because if it requires investment from your business to deliver on those requirements, if the business doesn't invest, then the service provider can't provide that coverage. So it's such an important point to understand, I think.
So again, thinking about if I was within a small business, I'm kind of hearing what you guys are saying, and yeah, clearly there's a risk there. But in terms of, I'm sitting here thinking, well, who would want what I've got as a small business? What I make a little widget kind of thing, and who actually wants that? Who needs that?
They just want money.
Yeah,
It's simple as.
What are they after? What are these nasty people or whatever after?
I would say, to you, as you were talking there, and you said, who would want what I've got? You, right? So if someone encrypts that, you don't have it anymore. So that can quite often be the answer. They don't want what it is you have. They want you to pay for access to it, or they're looking to it to extort you. Ransomware and so on. Someone I knew years ago coined this phrase, and if you think you put yourself in the customer's shoes and you think about it like this, if you were a bad actor and you had access to your network. There's really two questions you can ask. How would I get rich? Right, so you've got unfettered access to the environment. You want to get rich. How do you get rich? And protect those things. Put some controls and around those things. And then how do I cause as much damage as possible? If I wanted to disrupt your business to the absolute maximum, how would I do that? And once you've asked yourself those questions about your environment, you can quite quickly see where you should put the controls in place, or where you should focus your efforts.
And then we were talking again probably before as well around, so what generally will they do? Let's assume they've got in, they're accessing some data, or they've got some data, or they've encrypted some data. What are they after? As in, what do they want?
Well, they're either trying to extort money from you to maybe return that data to you, probably won't, but or they're looking to intercept and divert payments and funds, whether that's intercepting emails between the organisation and its suppliers or debtors, or even just straightforward understanding how to gain access to their banks and their financial storage areas. And that information can be used in multiple different ways. You know, they could use that information to attack the organisation directly, or if they've got a large base of customers, then to attack those customers and look to divert money coming in from those customers.
So it's fair to say that I guess predominantly most of what they're after is
one
some
goal.
sort of cash.
There's one goal. It's money.
I guess there are other threats as well out there. You could have just disgruntled employees that have left and want to cause some damage, or you've got people that also want to do reputational damage as well to an organisation, so they can't continue to trade, or they, if they're built on a name and that name ceases to exist, then or loses its tarnish, then
I guess those are the risks that come with allowing yourself necessarily to fall foul of an attack that can either damage you financially or it becomes very visible and public. If you are if your customers do rely on you reputationally, and that reputation does become tarnished, then are they going to stay? If there's somebody else in the industry that's providing the same services as you, then they're going to go there, aren't they?
I think it's a great point, isn't it? That reputational damage. If you just think about it from your own kind of personal point of view, I do. When I'm going to be dealing with a company, or if I am currently a customer of a company, and I hear that they've got woefully inadequate security and they've let my details be taken, stolen, used, it really does affect the decision I make as a customer. And I'm sure it's the same for lots of people and lots of businesses out there. We talked about supply chain earlier. Certainly if I ran my own business, I wouldn't be allowing anyone to connect into my organisation unless I was happy that they were secure, right? They had adequate security to be able to connect into and out of my network. I think it's that reputational damage. Don't underestimate what how powerful that can be.
I think I'm not sure why this is just quite popped into my head. Maybe it's because the tennis at Wimbledon's only just finished recently, which will give you some idea as to when we're recording this. But I'm thinking again with that reputational damage, if you're part of that supply chain as well, like I'm thinking strawberries and cream, they go so well together, right? They are two separate things, but they're so well together. And if one organisation loses some sort of reputational or has a cyber attack, loses that reputation, it can affect their partner, can't it? Quite substantially, I would imagine.
Well, I mean, if they are a supplier to other organisations, then yes, I mean that failure can then start to
direct relationship, isn't it?
Yeah.
Again, I know we're scaring a little bit here, but have we got some ideas or some examples? of some recent attacks? I think we were discussing as well.
Yeah, the one that springs to mind that really catastrophic effect on people's lives was the recent one to some of the NHS hospitals in London, again which was a supply chain attack, and that one front page news, of course, and the story continues to evolve, but just the fact that it really does bring to life how serious some of these attacks can be in terms of the consequences, right? That meant thousands of operations didn't take place because of that attack. So it wasn't just financial. Of course, there will be a financial aspect to it to repair, recover, and so on. But just the human element of it. People missed operations, probably still haven't had them, which is incredibly worrying. It just goes to show that these threat actors, whether it be independent groups or nation state actors, nothing is out of bounds. Charities, hospitals, businesses, small businesses, large businesses, everybody is fair game to those individuals, and I think they've showed that with some of the attacks that we've seen.
Yeah, and I mean that was a good example of the kind of the concepts around why. I think with that NHS one, because it ultimately they came up with a range of different reasons as to why they were doing it. It was a punishment for supplying weapons to Israel or something along those lines, and it's none of that. They just want the money. they'll come up, they'll say anything to justify why they're doing it, but they're just looking for the money, and the key stats there were, beyond the kind of the large stack of private personal information that's been published on the dark web, 1,300 operations that didn't take place because of it, and a backlog of 6,000 in a piece of critical industry that's already under immense pressure.
I think the worst kind of quote that I saw from that group was "Don't blame us," which it just might
it's
boggles the mind.
the completely the total selfishness of the act, because it's harming. It's not just harming the organisation or a few people who maybe sit on the board of that business. It's harming thousands and thousands and thousands of people.
I think the only other thing I'd just add to that, there was an example a few years ago, if we think about nation state attacks and how is that relevant to a small, medium business, right? When something quite sophisticated gets out into the wild, if you're vulnerable to it, whether you're the intended target or not, you can get quite quickly caught up in that. So, yes, it was maybe a targeted, sophisticated nation state attack, and how is that relevant to an SMB or a small medium business? That's how, right? If you're vulnerable to that particular exploit, then you can end up getting caught up in that. Once it gets out into the wild, it can end up in places that it wasn't intended to be, and they'll just as happily take your money as they would someone else's, right?
So I guess to think about closing this particular webinar session, let's think about maybe one or two things each, if you can. Where to start? I mean, obviously we've talked about some of the issues that you can find and some of the vulnerabilities and some of the things that they're after. Could you give the people listening a few, like say one or two each, just to think about where would you start, what would you do, how can you begin your journey?
So for me, I would definitely start with identities for lots of the reasons we've said now. The perimeters maybe disappeared. Lots of organisations are born in the cloud and solely exist in the cloud. Identities are the new perimeter, if you like. So understanding who your users are, both your internal users, your guests, contractors, machine accounts, administrative accounts, privileged accounts. Make sure you've got a good handle on those identities and you know who you're allowing access, and you limit that access as much as you possibly can. And once you have an understanding of those identities, it then becomes easier to start to limit the access. I think the best analogy I've heard on that one is if we think about it in terms of a blast radius, right? So too many organizations, you can go in and look at any account that has access to their environment, and it's overly permissive. They have access to everything in that environment. So if that one user account is compromised, the blast radius of that incident is everything. It's their whole environment, all of their data, all of their systems. Right? If we can reduce that blast radius by limiting access to only what's needed, if you are unfortunate enough to be the victim of an incident, that blast radius is now much smaller. It's much more controllable. So I would say identities would be mine. There are others, of course, but in the interest of time, I'll hand over and I'll stop with identities.
Well, I mean, that's where I'd start as well, but I think that the only way that I can build on that is the acceptance of what is, horrible phrase, but the new normal. Which is that we've accepted for a long time that you have to have locks on your doors, you've got to have keys for your car, because if you don't have those things, then things will disappear. And the same now exists very much for your data,
the new valuable,
and because that's a valuable commodity, and it's not just a commodity that's valuable, but it's a commodity that's very easily found, and you can't hide it under a mat because you've got it splashed all over social media, other places like LinkedIn. Online identities are so easy to track and understand, and people's personas are very easy to understand because they've got so much of themselves online, and you have to understand the risk that they are facing. So that identity security, your biological defense is your awareness of that weakness, and the awareness that you give to your users and your staff around those weaknesses, so that they understand that as well, and that they adopt the practices that they need to adopt in every aspect of their daily lives. Not just when they're at work. They should take this home with them, and they should live that in their lives wherever they are. And accepting that point, that is now normal, is the first step to being able to understand why you have to, weave it through everything.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much for your time today, gentlemen. That's been fantastic. Please do join us. This is one of many sessions that we've got on our Get to Secure series that we're doing from Infinity Group. Thank you.